All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. It's me, Stormie Grace. If we haven't met before, I'm a professional practicing astrologer and I do evolutionary and humanistic astrology. And that is important so that you know what lens I'm using when we're talking about astrology. But today, this is your video where we're going to talk about the upcoming Venus retrograde, which I don't think is a passive retrograde at all. But the first thing that I want to do is make sure that we understand what Venus retrograde is, what we can look for, how it's going to be impacting us, what does it mean for you, and also what you were doing in, what is it, 2017 to see where this cycle might have been present in your life before as well. And to help have this beautiful conversation, I've welcomed back Nicholas Polmanakis. So welcome back.
Hello, Stormy. Thanks for having me back. It's good to see you again. We've seen each other on camera and in person within the last so many weeks, I think, right?
Yes,
Uh,
we
yeah,
yeah. It was
yeah.
good. It's wonderful to have those reconnections with other astrologers. So we're not just like YouTubing together, so we
hmm
get like actually see each other.
Well, yeah, and then there's the actual sensory part of it all, right? So when you're with somebody in physical space, like we were, it's like, oh, I could see you, and there's a hug, and speaking of Venus, you know what I mean? Like what Venus-y types of things happen. The sound of our voices, we reading each other's body language, just being human, that's all. That's so and nice weather it was, by the way, too. So yeah, yeah,
Did not suck. That
yeah.
did not suck.
No, it didn't. Yeah.
Awesome. So you guys, you can always go over and check out Nicholas and his channel. He's putting out a lot of beautiful, really soul-driven content that I would invite you to explore, especially if you are feeling like you would like to have astrology in your life that keeps you awake and aware to what's going on, but is not fear-mongered. So you can check out Sparkles of Gold. That channel I'll make sure is linked in the description box down below. Now, Venus is getting ready to station retrograde in Aries March 1st of this year, but that's like not all. It's a bit of a busy retrograde. So I want to tell you right now, in this video, we're going to go over the basics and some key players that are bringing energy in so that you can grab your chart and see how this astrology is working. And then there will be a series of 3 other videos taking you a little bit deeper and giving you a little bit more to think about and a little bit more astrology to practice as the weeks go on. So let's start with first things first, Venus retrograde. Nicholas, do you want to talk to us about that?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one because I think it's sneaky. There's been so many aspects and so many planetary stories we've been dealing with for the last several months, so then all of a sudden we're going to have a Venus stop moving forward and going backwards. I think it can be a surprise for many. Many of us in the industry and those who follow astrology, we're really concentrating on the eclipses that are going to happen in March. And so that in itself is an intense story and a bigger story. But in the middle of it all, we have Venus, the planet of love and relationships and what we value, about to go through a redefinition process. And it's, I think, different and very distinct from even past Venus retrogrades. So in that case, in that sense, for those watching, is this, no, this, we're in rare times here that not only are we going to be dealing with eclipses in March, we'll be dealing with Venus being retrograde starting in Aries, and even Mercury will be along in this story, telling the story, I should say, from Aries to Pisces. But I always, being a Venus ruled person, have come to appreciate these times when Venus goes backwards because I feel that that's when Venus is at its most powerful in the sense where recalibration, redefinition, and restructuring of Venus types of things can happen. And so, even astronomically, it's really close to us and really powerful. So if you think about the energies behind us, and you're the type of person that's looking for a deeper understanding and taking that deeper understanding with Venus and actually putting it into matter in the universe, putting it into play, Venus retrogrades are a most opportune time to do this. So I try to come from a space of feeling empowered, where one has a choice in matters, how one can have a choice in how to react to things in life, and to not come from a fear-based place, even though challenges may come up during a transit like this. When we feel that we have an understanding and are integrated with the planetary energy or with nature itself, then I feel like we are at our most powerful. So that's the outlook I'm taking here with Venus retrograde and starting in Aries. But anyway, that's some thoughts there off the top of my head, Stormy. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that they're great thoughts. And thinking about the fact that when we're looking into the astrology, Venus is our planet that represents there's beauty, there's harmony, there's the diplomacy that we're able to provide when we're dealing with one another. And sometimes I think that when we talk about Venus, even as a professional, sometimes it can be very poo-pooed. You know, we can poo-poo and be like, oh, it's not just beauty, it's not just these things. And sometimes it is. But more than anything, I think what Venus harnesses for all of us to start considering is the way that we value things. Right. And because what I value is what I will continue to interact with. What I value is what I'm going to call into my life or what I'm going to push out of my life. And this is a big time as the world is shifting to be considering truly, deeply, what do I value and how am I willing to let that come to me? The other principle I think a lot about in every chart, whether you're man, woman, or whatever, is our relationship with feminine energy. And I just think that this retrograde is so profound because we've come out of the Pluto and Capricorn time where we had mass feminine container. And now, whilst Pluto is in Aquarius, it's a masculine container. And in a masculine container, femininity can find out how healthy it is or not. It has to have like this reflection to say, I'm different. This is a different energy. So we'll all also be brought to the table, I think, for this reclamation. That's really what I think of with Venus retrograde, reclaiming feminine energy. What does that mean? How do I value rest? How do I value receiving? How do I value beauty? Right? How do I value money? All of these questions. I think you're right. Venus in a retrograde gets really powerful because we can answer and explore these questions. But obviously here in Aries, it's going to be a bit less unapologetic about
Yes,
searching
that's one way of saying it. Yeah, it's one way of saying, a lot of times when I think of Aries and the sign of Aries and being a fire sign, a cardinal sign, it starts the season off, that initiates, ruled by Mars. We're talking about in myth and archetype the planet of like war and cutting and severing and inflammation and attacking or initiating, all these words that I just used to go back to like, oh, we're going to talk about, with Venus feminine principles about receptivity and harmony, or whatever. Like, this is the typical Mars Venus way of looking things. Supposedly they're opposites, right? But I think here that part of love and part of understanding whether it's masculine archetypes or feminine archetypes is just knowing the different costumes, the different ways of being it. So even in love, I think there is a way of shooting for and being aggressive with what one wants and what one is coming from a value place and then going after it. And I think Venus and Aries does that. It just can't help but do that. But at the same time, there is a certain type of situation that happens where uh, there might be missing things or not catching certain things in it, which is, I'm not trying to get down on Aries, but sometimes Aries, they're really good at starting and jumping and leaping, without even thinking. We need that in our lives, right? We need to change something. I need to put myself in the world. I need to do it now. So that's great. But sometimes we miss things in that place. And I think part of what's going to happen here in this transit is Venus and Aries has to learn a different way of maneuvering. And I think it comes in a lot to what you say, these feminine principles,
Yeah,
and having to move at a different pace and not just immediately leave, right? Even though they're going
yeah,
to want to, and they're going to do it and crash and burn actually, and come back and learn some of these lessons like, oh, I could take my time, or there's different viewpoints, or I can kind of understand different sides. And by doing that, you're immediately having to take time and to slow down a pace and not do the wild leaping.
yeah.
And again, very simple, actually. I think very simple ways to understand and possibly bring in new knowledge, from a Venus
Mhm.
perspective. But again, it's very hard if you know anybody in your life has got major Aries signatures in the chart to even have a conversation like this with them. They're just, it's just, they just have to do
I,
it, So
yeah.
I think a little bit of the story here in this Venus in Aries retrograde, there is some crashing and burning that happens. There is running into the wall or falling down and getting a scrape to understand some of these lessons that are about to come our way. So.
Absolutely, because I think, and I don't want to be at all unclear or uncertain about this, I do think that the Venus in Aries retrograde is a war on femininity. Absolutely. However, it's the war from within because we can cut away as well. And what I think some of the stories will be cutting away from the softness of Venus is going to be, I was told to be soft, but like not too soft. I was told to do this, but not to this. So there is, but the war is not an external scenario. I think we're going to be going in and cutting away old loves, old lovers, old things that we value that we don't anymore, old wounds, right? There are going to be other players we're going to talk about in this story who are going to show us that we can stop clenching around old stories and old places where we had mistrust, and we can. Aries teaches through fire, Aries cauterizes and cuts away through fire, and then Pisces shows us how to flow back into it. But in it, I'm with you. When that
Yeah.
femininity gets clear on what is worth fighting for, knowing what to release comes more easily. So let's talk about some of the actual astro like that is coming in this particular space. So first of all, we are already in the Venus retrograde shadow time. We actually moved into this position in January. Wait, is it January? No, we're in February. Oh my gosh. I don't
I
know what it is,
know,
but
I
like
know.
I'm like, what day is it? It's like, January
Time
2000.
is just, yeah, yeah.
So
I'm with
we
you.
we
I'm with
moved
you.
into the pre-retrograde shadow time at 24 degrees of Pisces, and we did this on January 28th. So if you're keeping your astrological journal or something like that, make sure you're just taking note of the degrees that we're going to be working with, because we'll be working between 24 degrees of Pisces and 10 degrees of Aries. So on March 1st, we're going to actually see Pisces take that retrograde. We'll see that Venus stations direct on the 12th, back at that 24 degrees of Pisces, but then we've got to come out of the cycle. The Venus has to unpack the bags, unpack the goodies, and that will be May 16th when it gets back to that 10 degrees of Aries, and we'll be carrying all sorts of goodies back in that bag, won't we?
Mhm.
Will we
Yeah.
not?
Yeah, and I just realized what you just said. We determined we're in February because time is going by fast. But then you go, oh, Venus is going to be done in Aries after all this in May. So again, for those watching, think about how much time we're dealing with here. We're talking months of a story, really. We're about to get into the heart of the story here, the peak part of it, I think, when we're in March and April. So. And just to say this too, because again, I how this video is labeled or titled, Venus is retrograde in Aries. That's the official thing, but we keep bringing up Pisces here, and part of what's happening with the degrees that you've mentioned, Stormy, is it starts in Aries and it's going to go back into Pisces. So in a sense, it's advertised as Venus in Aries, right? Like it should
Right.
be, but it's Venus and Pisces too. So this is what makes it a very distinct and rare type of Venus retrograde, is we're going to be moving back and forth from Aries energy to Pisces energy and then back to Aries. So
Brilliant.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's
you said
true.
that we said March 1st was the station, correct? The
Yes.
Venus station was March 1st at 10 degrees Aries.
Yes.
So yeah.
And it's kind of interesting too, I think, at this time, as we see Venus step into its retrograde in the vibration of Aries, we want to, of course, understand what that energy is. We kind of painted you a little picture there, but what is the ruling planet of Aries doing at the time of retrograde? Now, we've had Mars, yes, come direct and out of the retrograde, but Mars is still unpacking his suitcase from his retrograde time and the things that learned and the strategies that we're going to apply. but he is not back in bounds, not yet. So we have very, very loosely for me, because I'm an orb snob, but we have very loosely this Venus Mars square where Mars is still out of bounds and in the vibration of Cancer. So this is still frustrating. There's still a pretty passionate clash that I think that is going on because Mars is like, I want to still operate outside of the rules. I got some different strategies, but I want to run outside of the rules. So it to me feels like at least at the very beginning of this retrograde, the emotions are running high. Things are still a little bit reactive. So seeing at this time as Venus starts to retrograde, these potential power struggles around finances and what I value or in my relationships, what am I fighting for? Or feeling like I'm not being heard or understood, or, just the instability of the dynamics where there's a fair amount of push and pull, old wounds coming back up, that especially around home family security.
Mhm.
I think these are things we're going to be able to. We want to start to watch the signatures that the energy invites us to because Mars in Cancer doesn't fight bang on. It doesn't fight head on. So emotionally, and even in the story, I think of our femininity, our values, we may not directly, as Venus goes retrograde, be clear what it is. I tend to find that with Mars and Venus retrograde, I don't know about you, like we go into it and it's like, yeah, this is not so bad. And like the midway point, everybody's sweating
Yeah.
because then we're in the heat of the work and it's like, oh, hold on, wait a minute, right? We've toned
Yeah,
up a bit.
I think from a very raw human instinctual level, I mean, we're always about survival. I mean, whether you're by yourself or you have your crew, your clan, your family, you know, it's about survival. And I think with Venus being in Aries, Aries is about the initial, it's about survival in a sense. And once they have to put themselves in the world, they need to go out and get and hunt and survive and put
Yes.
themselves in the world with sword and shield, you know? And then Mars, the ruler of this, is doing it in Cancer. So yeah, it's not direct, but I think the sign of Cancer is also instinctual also. And it's about protection. Let's save your crew and clan, right? And about
Yes.
what happens in that container protection space, the emotional storylines that happen, or how we mature emotionally, or how we deal with our emotional selves, and Cancer wants to protect and nurture that, right? So on a base core level, we're having Venus and Mars in retrograde places. They're completely having to review what this is. And to go to what you said, Stormy, then it gets really simple and very reactive. So it's like if right now, if everybody's in some sort of instinctual survival mode and it's going through redefinition process, things get really simple and emotional and can get heavy. And if you're looking at a Mars retrograde in Cancer, which is ruled by the moon, so wherever the moon is, you can see how moody this is every 2.5 days, and whatever the moon's doing in all this. So again, it's like basic essential needs
Yeah.
are at play here. And then when we bring in the something else of Venus of like, well, if we're talking about our essential needs, it's like basically, well, what do we value? What do we have around us as of meaning that
Mhm.
in a sense takes care of those essential needs, right? For myself, for my family, for my community. So in that sense, along with a lot of the intense energy in the world, very sensitive these days. I think more so than ever. And when we're in those places and we're reacting from those places, um, things have a tendency to get caustic, or there's short fuses, so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
saying that during retrogrades, if somehow someone, and we're already being aware of this, if you're following astrology and you're like, oh, Venus is retrograde or Mars is retrograde, you already have half the battle done because you're being aware of the situation. And so in that awareness, can you then like use the time like, well, what are then my values? And if I'm reacting from these
Right.
places, and it's having to review the base core tenets of what someone stands by from the value perspective, right? And
Yeah.
and from the protection perspective, and then you take all of this then through, I think, a revamping and relooking at the feminine perspective in all this.
Mhm.
So, our how are the roles that we take on, or the roles that we've taken on in the past, or what was shown to us that we thought we were supposed to do in this certain way.
Right.
All of this is up on the table, right? But can someone step out of the emotional reactiveness and the survival mode? Can you step out to take a look at this? I think that's a key part of this. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And I think you're nailing it when you say it is a key part. Like some of the fire, like stepping into some of that fire, as the world is changing and pushing on that security and the fear and the Venus, are you going to be financially impulsive? Are you financially educated? What is the fire? What is the kind of the pain point that you're going to get the opportunity through the cycle to walk back? Because I do think that the shift between that Aries and Pisces is going to ask us to rethink. I'm going to first go Venus in Aries and chase that thing, right? And then as I'm coming through the cycle, I get to go, wait, why Mercury rethink? Why am I chasing
Hmm.
this? And does this actually align with what I want and I value? But first, we got to get a little fire on our hiney. I can't remember her name, but it might have been, what is her name? Elizabeth Gilbert. She said nobody gets busy changing until they're over their own shit. And I really believe that.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, totally.
Sometimes I don't know what I need to be over until I get into a retrograde and it's kind of handed back to me and I can go, I can do this Mars retrograde different.
Hmm. Or Venus in Aries is full on 100% for what they supposedly want, right? And they go out and do it. And typically, sometimes, if anybody knows a Venus in Aries, we're talking generally here. Let's say there was a courting process going on, and so a Venus in Aries is coming towards me. There's no hiding what they feel, or what they're going to tell me. They're
Yeah,
going to tell me what they want. I want you that, and then, but in the sense, they're wanting that reaction back,
yeah,
right? It's all in the moment. But let's say the Venus in Aries doesn't get the reaction back, or they can't get what they want now.
yeah,
These are key moments that happen because then they just go to the next thing and go find whatever. I'm like, okay, maybe that works, but maybe it doesn't actually. Maybe a Venus in Aries has been doing a massive pattern of this for a long time, and in the end, in the seeking, still doesn't have what they want. So
exactly.
the approach of how Venus and Aries does this is under review. How if someone reciprocates from in the love relational level what Venus and Aries needs, right? And I think what happens here in this review process, there is not only lessons to be learned, but there's some to be reminded of. Let's say when Venus during the retrograde cycle goes back into Pisces, how would the Venus and Pisces do
Mhm.
in the exact same situation, right? And
Mhm.
there's a massive difference that happens there because it's more about receptivity with Venus and Pisces. It's more about not needing to do it now. It's timeless actually in Venus and Pisces, right? It can seem that way.
Right.
And I think here, again, we're talking about instinct and security and the values that we have that are the underpinning of all this. And they're going to go through a review process. I think some of the lessons just have to actually do with time itself and wanting things now. And so
Mhm.
we're thankful in backwards planet storylines, retrogrades, to go back because we cannot move forward. We cannot do this, right? And then a Venus in Aries has to come to terms with that in itself first, and
Yeah,
then slowly
yeah,
in that stationary or moving backwards place instead of being on the battlefield of love or the battlefield of life way that's the language they speak through
hmm,
Aries. I think one has to be there sit and it's more of a contemplation and acceptance, and usually when we're in places like this, we start to feel everything, and I think it all comes back to an inherent place which is about love and compassion for oneself,
yeah.
and so on and so forth. So
No, I think your
but
so on and so forth is beautiful
yeah,
because in Pisces, it is a return. It is a Venus return, a reclamation of self. Like you got to remember who you are outside of the hustle. And
yeah,
outside of the hustle, would you do it that way? Because with Venus, we create. So are you creating in a way that is true to you, is true to a vibration you can hold on to, that you can live with, you can move in? Are you creating, right? Because Pisces will show us that it will dissolve all sorts of things. And that that dissolving, I think, will bring a lot of clarity. It's funny you said, "Where's the moon in all this?" Well, it's conjunct Pisces at the time. So listen, y'all, the reactivity is potentially very real. But
Mhm.
you notice some other things going on too, so I want to see how these fit into the pattern in just one second. But I want to take us back really quickly, you guys, for your journal and your writing or looking back into your chart, because Venus moves in cycles like everything else. Going back to 2017, we saw ourselves in a similar arrangement of looking at this Venusian energy. So go back into your life, go back into your chart. What was happening at that time, things that were coming up for review, things in relationships, things about your values. You can go really, what was it? So what was the time frame? So that would have been March to April as well in
Mhm.
2017. So go back. What are the common themes that are coming up? Did you just go after something really impulsively? And even if it worked out, how's that thing holding on today? Right? Because listen, I am a Venus in Aries. I told my husband I was his girlfriend. So, but it's been almost 10 years. It's been almost 10 years. So we've sorted it out, right? Like, so did you go and get something? And if so, what kind of shape is it in today?
Yeah.
So step back because I think that the most delicious piece of your astrology, first of all, is your astrology. We're talking about it generally, but pull it into your chart and then cycle back. Because what I have continued to find is we just live our cycles. We just live our cycles and our patterns, but the hope is we bring more wisdom to them. So you've been here before-ish.
Mhm.
So take some comfort in that. So, Nicholas, who are the
Yeah.
other players that are going to help us put things in the Venus suitcase?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so yeah, speaking of, and by the way, you mentioned 8 year increments here when you went back, and that's a major part of a larger Venus story. And I know down the line in your series here, your Venus series, that I have a feeling some of these other speakers you're going to have are going to talk about this. So saying that, I think there's some players and dates. Mercury's a major player in this because Mercury will be going retrograde here pretty much around the same time Venus does this. So like anybody's listening, and you have there's the story and the stigma out there whenever Mercury goes retrograde, everything just falls apart. I'm not in agreement with that, but I can understand why people think that on a mass level. But basically, Venus is going to go backwards, starting in Aries and doing the same movement, just faster, I would say, back in the Pisces. That particular point in time is interesting because uh, I think Mercury has a major component, as always, when it comes with the messages being sent and being taken in, how something gets from point A to point B. And as we know during retrogrades, sometimes things can get discombobulated or they don't get to from point A to point B, and there's a review of all that kind of thing. So it's conversations that are going to happen in all this in this relational story with Venus. And also, you can look at it from a research point of view that when Mercury's going backwards, a lot of times we're redefining, reviewing, and we're researching a particular focus and subject. In this case, it's Mercury and Aries going back into Mercury and Pisces. So I think they're in tandem here. And I
Yeah.
look at this as a gift because if sometimes we as human beings, it all depends on what place we're coming from. Some of us are coming from our core places, like our lower chakra, and some of us are leading up here, right? There's no judgment in all this, but I always think about balance, right? And so sometimes if we're coming from a Venus survival perspective in Aries and going back, it's like, well, what type of information, what kind of research can I do along with this to help me on the journey and help me balance where I stem and take my actions from, and then to kind of bring information to from other places to help balance, you could say, your chakras, or the more mind activity to the lower activity, or vice versa, right? And at the same time, if we're dealing with other people,
Mhm, mhm.
and we have Venus in Aries, there are no filters here. So things that are said in the moment and fiery and emotional, be prepared to possibly have to like have that pushed back towards you or
Yeah.
say, you said this, you actually said this, do you remember? I'm like, I did. And like, no, I didn't say that. And then you could see in relational activities how things happen. So it's in this sense too, we have to be careful. So it's a pacing thing. So someone's Venus in Aries, and you know yourself well enough to be like, well, I need to speak my truth and I don't want to dodge around it. This is good because that's what you're known for. We need you. We learn from you when we do this. At the same time, it's like, well, it's about timing. Do you always say the truth in the moment? And does it always come out and with hellfire and that? And sometimes
Right.
we have to be more calculative to understand the right moments to do it. And by doing that and taking steps back during a review period, like a retrograde with Mercury and all this story, we could become more defined in our message,
Mhm.
calmer in our message, but still taking care of one's personal need from the mind into their heart, right? You're not completely dissing the Mercury and Aries and Venus Aries part of your life. You're just becoming more refined in it. And we do that during review periods. So Mercury's going to do this along with Venus. It's going to do the same pattern. It's going to go back into Pisces. Again, how would Mercury and Pisces be in that relational situation when they're communicating? It's a completely different beast. They actually might not say it directly. They actually might write you a poem.
That's right. They're like, I wrote you a little something, a little
But
jot over here.
yeah, and then you're trying to understand relation, like, well, you don't understand what I'm saying. Like, remember that song I sent you? And they're like, that song that Mercury and Pisces sent you was the message, right?
Yeah.
So there's lessons on both sides of this, and that's where I think Mercury and Pisces, even when the retrograde there too, and Venus and Pisces, almost learns from the Aries part about the directness that needs because of Pisces has a tendency to kind of deflect or move around and not be straightforward,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
on that sense, you see where the balance is happening here. They're both learning from each other, but it happens during a certain period of time. And Mercury is doing with Venus, Venus is doing with Mercury. So,
And it's really interesting because as Mercury actually moves into its pre-retrograde shadow time, this is happening March 1st. So Venus is heading into this retrograde, right? And we get it up here at this 10 degrees of Aries, but then Mercury is moving into the pre-retrograde shadow, but it's like this. So Aries or Mercury is moving at 26 degrees of Pisces, right? We had the Venus retrograde start its pre-retrograde shadow at 24. So really Mercury is like, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this degree point because this is where we're going to come back to
mhm,
over and over and over again. And then Mercury, through its retrograde, only gets to 9 degrees of Aries. So you're literally what has been coming up for you. This is what I like about astrology. This is what you're talking about. You don't have to worry about solving all of this. It's this. It's
mhm,
this. What's happening in these degree points of your chart? Because that is likely where the universe is going, pay attention. We have a story to unfold here at this particular time. But I do like that Mercury gets into that position and it's like, okay, listen, let's bring a little emotional intelligence, but also let's see what needs to be surrendered or dissolved here in how we think about this, how we express this, how we share this, these kinds of, ideas and ideologies, which I think is going to be, like you said, pretty important because even how I think about things, because Mercury does pop into Aries and then it's going to start, backing up and getting ready for this retrograde dance and all of this good stuff. But how I think about things, how I receive information can be just as much as a help or a hindrance to my relationships, to my finances, to my value system and how I move in that. One of the things I can share about is I am Venus in Aries. Like I've got Venus in Aries, right? And so forever, my husband is in Aries. God bless that union
mhm.
because he would say something and I would be like, yeah, but why? Yeah, but why? And I'm girl bossing him to death. And it turns out that's not nice, right? People don't like that, right? So the idea of what if I don't have to win to have my values known all of the time? It's a very feminine principle. What if
Mhm.
this is allowed to be in ease? Right. So I think about this in practical ways in our lives. Like, how do you even think about your spouse? How do you talk about them? How do you talk with them? How are we talking to ourselves? How do you think about money? How do you talk about money? These are things that are highly under review, and some of that stuff has to be cut away, which will be we're going to have an eclipse. to help that happen, right?
Yeah, I know. This is the thing. This is kind of, we started talking in this video about like what a lot of people are looking forward to or be focusing on in March because we've got two eclipses that are going to happen 2 weeks from apart. And, this eclipse that happens on March 29th is at 9 degrees Aries. This is the point, the points that we're talking about. This is where Venus stations, this is the Mercury thing. So, I think if we just quickly know out there, I really like the thing that you said about like we can concentrate on these degrees, this space here, because the tendency here in the world these days, we get sidetracked. There's so much information in the bigger picture of things. And then let's just say we're dealing with our personal lives with what we value in relationships and money and resources and everything, right? It could get completely scattered into pieces. So first of all, the concentrated points in time from those later degrees in Pisces into the beginning first decan of Aries, basically first 10 degrees, it's a great start. It's a great place to focus. Then you know that Mercury is going to be doing a messaging thing and reviewing that area, right, along with Venus. Then, yes, we have major eclipse that happens here, and this particular eclipse pretty much ends the Libra Aries eclipse cycle from
Yeah.
the last year and a half. So
Yes.
the combination of all of this, there is something going bye, like finally, like there's something that is going by. It's one that normally happens in eclipses. Something has to leave in order for something to come in, right?
Yep.
But when you have Venus and Mercury in these spaces too, doing the process, I don't think it's just like in someone's head or in their heart. I think with Mercury and Venus, it's actually in the tangible world. So yes, we're doing an internal story, but a lot of this will be played out in front of you through speaking and research with Mercury and with relating. So I think it's in and out, and I think this concentrated period of time, if one were to be focused on how to use it, is you definitely know something's leaving. You have to accept that. Like you have to accept that something has to go and understand the natural cycles of life with something leaving and so it's inherently it opens something up for something new to come in. And if you can understand this movement, then I don't think the transits could be as difficult or can be difficult for you, and they're challenging and there's certain realities of letting go that one has to shed a tear about. There's
Absolutely.
no denying that. And but at the same time, this is where you have, I think, in my opinion, a very interesting mix of masculine and feminine, because in a sense of what letting go is from the masculine perspective,
Very different.
right? It's very different from feminine,
Very
right?
different.
And so I actually think you get to see both sides of this play out here during the cycle. And depending on who you are and what that story is for you, you see what, in the sense, you stand in more, the feminine principles if you need to, right? Or if it's the other way around. And even when we're talking about like Venus and Aries of what they have to learn being Mars ruled, I'm the type of person who says even the warrior, even the masculine has to come to terms with the feminine internally. You're not losing anything by doing this
Absolutely.
at all. And I think it's just understanding that kind of balance or vice versa. The feminine understands the masculine a little bit more, like you started in the beginning of this video of what it is to be in those positions, and in a sense, let the masculine do its thing, and then it's reflected back towards you, and then you see what it is to be feminine, if that is something someone's trying to learn about themselves, right? So you have this on a massive level happening with these movements back and forth, and then with an eclipse that basically does, take something away or flushes something out and then brings something in. Not to sound too, ethereal about it, but I just want people to remember in these intense astrological transits in time that there's cycles and there are periods of time of adjustment. And I think that you always get a chance after these adjustment periods as we move forward, let's say past March and everything's moving forward, nothing's retrograde again. You get chances to apply these things
Yeah.
and not feel at the mercy of change or something you're letting something go. And let's say there's some sadness attached to it. At the same time, you get to shed a tear, but at the same time, you got to move forward and you have to apply what you learned. you know.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah.
agree. I just agree. And I think that's the beautiful part of why we gather here around astrology, regardless of what other beliefs and conditions of life are. When we gather here, we gather as lovers of astrology who want to use this tool to navigate what's coming up and looking at that, I think that this Venus retrograde, like you said, it's like it's grief, it's fire, it's wisdom, but it is a remembering. But I can't remember and live in who I am, if I don't remember my fire, if I don't remember that even it's a feminine principle, things make me angry, if I don't remember that I have a right to take up space, right? But in order to live in any one of those loving, valuable, pleasurable feminine principles, some stuff that I believed and how was behaving before will have to go. And it's pretty raw. I don't think that
Yeah.
this is a passive retrograde at all. And I talk about this in other videos in the series as well, because there really is something to shredding the illusion that politeness is a demonstration of femininity. It's not if it doesn't come from a true place, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Submission is not a bad word because it is something that is humbly offered. So if it's not coming from that place, then it's not a feminine principle. Like these places of forced harmony and asking the questions and needing to experience going through this is like, where am I even pretending to be at peace with things? Aries
Right.
is not going to have it. But what I do believe is that the universe is kind and divine and making space for it to surprise and delight us because what the retrograde is not about is just sadness. It's not about destruction without the replacement of wisdom, right? We cut away what was not ever real or it just isn't real anymore. And then as we eclipse, and like you said, we continue to go on and new energies flow in. We're never left. The universe never leaves a hole. It never leaves a hole.
Yeah, and it's again, someone can come back to this video and this point because it's really hard in the moment to remember
Absolutely.
this thing, right? It's really hard when you're in the cauldron, when you're in the middle of it all, And but yeah, again, and then from the astrological perspective, the technical timing perspective, you're paying attention to degrees or certain dates. Um, you know, there's a particular point in time in all this that I really, really like, and I will personally be focusing on. And
Yeah,
it
sure
actually,
is.
yeah, and it actually has to do with uh, well, first of all, on March 11th, let's just say this. On March 11th, Venus will be, and it's, going backwards at that point. At that point, it'd be at 8 degrees Aries, and Mercury will be at 8 degrees. There's going to be a Venus-Mercury conjunction that's going to happen on the 11th. Here's the meeting of the two. There's a conversation that's going to happen there, okay? And then, like on the 15th, so like 4 days later, that's when Mercury stops and goes backwards, right? So
And
you
it's
can
like
see
it
a
comes and
conver
gets the tea. It's like, um, let's have a
yeah.
think. We'll be back.
Yeah, and and the think actually might be heated. Like it's gonna have some passion behind all this, right? So yeah, several days later, Mercury then stations retrograde to go backwards at 9 degrees. 9, 10 degrees are critical points here in this big cycle. So you're gonna make note of that, right? But it's wild to me. It actually has to do with then we have the sun go in to Aries, which is the equinox, right? Spring in northern hemisphere, fall in northern. It's always a big moment for all of us that, let's say, we think about things from we went through all the astrological signs and went through the whole cycle, and then we get back to the beginning again at 0 degrees Aries. And for those who do deeper astrology work, we call this Aries point, Venus point. It is a massive point, space and time whenever we hit anything 0 Aries, because for the world and historical events, so on and so forth. Okay. So we have that moment. Venus goes in, or excuse me, the sun moves into Aries. Then it's a couple days later, on the 22nd of March, Venus is going backwards and meets the sun. And the reason why I went on this here, it's not a tangent because I talked about the cauldron or the place, is Venus, whenever it goes into the sun, this is the conjunction, and when it's at the very heart of it, they call it cazimi, right? In a sense, Venus is burned down by the sun to its essence, to its purest
Yeah.
form. There's a metaphorical death and rebirth process that happens. And we catch this in all retrogrades. Like when planets do retrogrades, it's at the midpoint of the retrograde story, Venus's story when it's retrograde. It's like 40-day story approximately. It's at the midpoint there that it's always going to be running through the sun or at the cauldron of the sun. So that in itself is symbolic. As for we're talking about letting go or burning things away, being renewed eventually, and that happens on the 22nd. But then it's 2 days later that Mercury going backwards is going to do the same thing with the sun. So you could see like a week of how important it is that particular week in all this. And we're not even at the eclipse at that point yet. We're not even there. But you could see how Venus and Mercury are going to do this ritual with the sun, this letting go and
Yeah.
shedding off and coming to its purest forms. Usually you're only going to catch one planet do this, right? But not two within 48 hours. So uh, if anybody who's following this, I would make a note of that week. If you're a type of person that is doing the internal work and it's represented through ritual or altars or prayer or whatever that you do, I think that's a fundamental point in all this to get to come stand in a pure place, a pure sun place. No
Yeah.
matter what the story of how difficult it is, that's a place where you can completely get it centered, I think. And I think whenever planets go through the sun like this, there is a divine message that comes through that can come through if one is available to it, and I'm one of these people that's like, I am humbled and I'm open for that
Yeah.
to come into my world. So I don't know what you think about that, Stormy, those types of movements, but
No, I think it's, what you're bringing up for me is the thought that, first of all, in any retrograde, there are helpers. That planet meets helpers and informers along the way to do that work and to develop. And along the way here, I just love that Venus and Mercury meet up, and they're already pretty cool little bedfellows, anyways. And
mhm,
so this time, Venus has some ideas of how things are going to go. And Mercury's like, let's have a think. I got to back up. You back up. We'll come back to it. But then as we come under the sun conversation, I really think that Venus gets a lot of support here because it's a pretty primal place where I think that first the conversation is that thinking won't work. Sun, Mercury, let's put some new ideas in place. And as Sun, Venus comes together, it's like the sun whispering, it's okay to let that go. It's
mhm.
okay to burn that away, but also hang tight. I'm not going to just, leave you hanging. I'm not going to leave you hanging over here. Instead, there's a rebirth in a new wisdom because the old's burned away. And now there's this like fierce awakening that's pretty available to you, and you can live in that way. However, I do think that as Venus comes back and moves back through the Aries energy after all of these connections are made, um, life will be disrupted, but it will be disrupted in the wisest way. Because if I don't value that anymore, I won't tolerate it in my space
Yeah.
anymore. And that is from finances to romance to my behavior to all of these things. So, in that way, to hear the dance of what's going to be playing out this time, I think it's beautiful to see how everyone will arise, but that we can also hold space for each other while we're going through it. Because, like you said, that eclipse is that
Yeah.
last Aries taking away. It's like you have even either learned to put this assertion into play, or maybe not, or we're still growing there.
Yeah, but I think in the end, it's sometimes with languaging when we say something's going away or whatever, sometimes one can have the tendency to think that loss is lost, like someone takes an L, like someone lost the game. And it's not about that. I think in the end, I think Aries it's need and the example it shows us to one must put themselves first in the world. It's an ego-based sign. Ain't nothing wrong with that. It's just how it happens. And so we I think in that story, if one is learning to let go of certain things that are not inherent with their value structure, they're reviewing their value structure, and this in the end, down the line, this enhances
Yeah.
it defines how one is going to show themselves in the world. So you become very clear on this. So my Mercury and Aries people, my Venus and Aries people, after this whole thing, this you want this. You want the letting go. You want this death and rebirth process to go through in the review. You want this. You need this because in order for, let's say, when it comes for your down the line from a more Aries language perspective, your more precision uh, uh,
Yes.
move in the world, the chessboard move on the battlefield. Again, I'm trying to speak in Aries words that they're thinking it's like the judo move, the martial arts move that you're going to
Yeah.
make, that it's refined and you know exactly where it's come from and it's aligned with the core of who you are and your value structure, right? That's what you
Yes.
that's what you want for maximum impact, right? For maximum efficiency, for maximum this is me, this is who I am. And again, it just depends on the person, right? So again, this process of even moving retrograde cycles and moving through the sun that we're talking about, then I think symbolically we have another moving through, and it's like if you after Mercury and the sun move through that week of March 22nd to the 24th, then they're still moving backwards. Then they're going to move out of Aries into Pisces, another liminal place, this
Yeah.
0 degrees Aries place to 29 degrees Pisces. This is another kind of letting go, or to me, it's very ethereal and mystical, actually. Again, this is a rare deal. And then we get into the Pisces realm of it, of then Pisces coming in to add its understanding to all this. And again, it's such a potent mid part of it all that week, all the way from the March 20th, I would say. Then it's like on the 27th of March, Venus goes back into Pisces, right? And that while it does that, it's with Neptune in Pisces, you
And
see?
everybody else and their sister with in Pisces.
Yep, pretty. Yeah, exactly. And everybody else in their system, which you're referencing like Saturn and the North Node, and so you have this, and then it's like then it's 2 days later on the 29th, Mercury then hits this 29 degrees Pisces place, and that happens to be the day where the eclipse happens. That's the new moon, in Aries, 9 degrees eclipse day. So you can see how everything's converging, how everything's moving, that it's not just, you clicked on this video and it says Venus in Aries, retrograde, and you're like, realize here
Yeah.
that Mercury's in the game, the sun's in the game, Pisces in the game, Neptune's in all this, and they all are going to have their influence on this whole thing, right? So when we get to the 29th, the end of the month, there's the eclipse, 9 degrees Aries. Mercury just goes back in to Pisces. It's there with Neptune, right? And
Yeah.
then something fascinating even happens in the next 24 hours after that. But again, and that's Neptune the next day will actually leave Pisces to go in
In
Aries.
Aries.
So, would you ever think that with movements of planets going from Aries to Pisces retrograde, that in one sense, one of the major planets involved to like move the Aries story along would actually be Neptune in all this? But it is. And so, not to put too much information out there, what we're getting to is you see the metamorphosis happening in many different ways, whether it's just retrogrades and it's movement through the sun and movement back to another sign, touching other planets. You see what's happening here, and I don't think they can't deny that something on a personal level is being shed away. But I actually think on a global level it is too.
Oh,
And
absolutely. Well, because we're not exempt from transits. You can't
no.
be like, you know what, Canada's not going to be doing some transits. Thank you. We'd like to skip out. You know what, we're not
Yeah.
going to be doing that retrograde here in Spain. It's not like that. Like no one,
I wish we could pick and choose,
right?
Stormy.
Right? No, because there'd be some countries who are like, yeah, I'm only doing, particular.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
thank God you don't get to choose. But I do love everything that you have just brought up and brought to the table. The astrology is sound, it's brilliant, and I think it allows us to, as we're moving through this Venus retrograde, to realize one, what needs to come down and because it's so good to sit and listen to us and to think about these things. But you're right, in the retrograde, when that Venus is on us and we have to feel through that. And we have to open up that old wound. We have to go back into the nostalgia. We have to address the fact that we have that deep longing for romance or finance, or we have to surrender something in a lesson or get real about what's going on in a situation. Those, to be in those, are different experiences. Like our DNA gets different to process those things,
Mhm.
I think. So to have a place where the astrology is sound, get some interpretation, some feedback around that, but also to realize there is help. The universe is not just out here being like good effing luck. You know what I mean? It's really not, that there are helpers along the way to help reshape it, because I don't think that we can also emerge out of this time in the world in general with different values, but a similar idea or ideal of who we used to be. It's almost like we cannot move forward into the rest of 2025 and beyond with an old version, but we have to be able to Neptune, like re-envision who and what we are and what we could be and what could be a reality for us, you know? I often
Mhm.
talk about that Neptunian energy, and I say, remember, like before a chair was a chair, it was Neptunian. It was just an idea. It was just
Yeah.
an intangible place. Somebody's legs were tired, and they were like, wouldn't it be nice to just not sit on the ground? And now look, it becomes tangible in Aries. It's like now there's chairs everywhere.
It
Now
was
everybody's got a
imagined.
chair.
It was imagined, and then Aries went out and hunted for the tools and tore down the tree, and then built the hammer, and then put it in a form, so like what you just said and what I just said in one way is an example of how the story moves here. It goes back, and then we get into this ethereal, imaginal place, and then once everything starts to move forward and goes back into Aries, you're putting into form and matter. It's not like I think, you're resetting the internal, but then the internal reflects out in the
On the
external world.
outside.
It's like this Aries parts of anybody's charts here, yeah, you're letting go, but then farther down the line, we get past March, and you mentioned that Venus is going to go through all the way till May in Aries, and Mercury's got to do retrack its steps.
Yeah.
This is when things people start taking action after the review period and letting go. And
Yeah.
their metamorphosis. So,
Yeah.
for those who want the action now, I don't think you get to have it now. The types of actions are internal, but you'll get to have the chance later. And
Yes.
and that's like I mentioned earlier, you become grateful for the review periods, because then you're like, oh, I'm so glad this came up, or my ex partner came up during the Venus retrograde, and I realized there's some loose ends I needed to tie up with how I deal with love and relationships, and I just kind of shuttered it away, or I didn't even forgive myself in all of that. Not even talking about forgiving somebody else, forgiving myself in that. That's the type of thing that can happen. The bill that I forgot to pay, more Venus type of stuff. It's the kind of thing it came back, or ignoring because I'm in fear of it because it gives me stress. It's like, no, some tools, some review periods along with Mercury during the retrograde, help confront your financial situation on the material level. But then it also brings in the deeper level of like, what is the value to me? And if I want certain things in my life and I need to put them out there, airy stuff, I need to go take care of business and come to terms with these things. Again, I gave you two examples. One's a money example, a relational example, and this is how the stuff plays out. And then you'll get a chance to move forward. And what's interesting about all of this to me is these degrees that we're talking about, the late Pisces and then early Aries, and especially like 0 degrees Aries place, is what we're about to do with Mercury retrograde and Venus retrograde is like almost like we're in the dojo. We're practicing because we know that, I mentioned on March 30th, Neptune is going to go into 0 degrees Aries. And then we know that at the end of May, the last week of May, Saturn is going to do the same thing. It's going to go into Aries. And we know we have a period of time in the summer where they're moving along. And then, as many of us who've done yearly forecasts know, we know Neptune and Saturn in the fall are going to go back into Pisces,
And be like, are
just
you
like how
sure?
yeah, just like how Venus and Mercury are going to do here, what we're talking about, and do this story. So it's actually this Venus retrograde, in my mind, and the Mercury retrograde that we're about to do here, it's actually a bigger map for people and for the world, because really, that I would think the biggest theme this year is planets leaving the outer body planets, leaving one place they've been to for a while and entering in this case, Aries, and then going back and then finally at the beginning of 2026. We're fully pushing forward, right?
Yes.
So what's ahead of us now with Venus and Mercury is, I think, like a testing zone, a dojo, a training ground, to understand what Aries is, to understand the last degrees of Pisces for something that's bigger down the line. So I hope, that makes sense.
Yeah,
From
it
a
does
broader
make sense. I mean,
perspective,
if we've
yeah.
seen the Matrix, at first Neo's in there just getting kicked in his face, like left and right.
Yeah.
And they're like, it's not real. That's not real. And once he starts to get it, it's very Venusian the way he's able to anticipate a move or think of something and call it to him and realize he already has the answer. I mean, my God, when the Oracle gives him the thing and he's like, you knew I was going to ask for that. And she's like, that doesn't matter, right? It's like,
Yeah.
but he's
Yeah.
remembering that he already had the answers. So I think that there's a fair amount of all of that going on. And you guys, more than anything, from a really big place of love and work and walking together, I'm hoping that what we've talked about today, some concepts, are comforting to you or guiding to you for how to walk into how to move with this because it is very easy, I feel like, to go out there and hear the overarching view and a fear-based view and not really be able to slow down and soften into what your life in this part of the journey is asking you for. So I'm hoping that Nick and I were able to bring that in here. I always love, I feel like we have a good Venus Mars dynamic when we bring things out because
Yeah, no, he did. I knew that you're Venus and Aries, but I completely forgot going into this, and I'm like, whoa, you're like the centerpiece of all this. Like, this transit for you, what's about to roll through with Mercury and
yeah,
so on and so forth for you is pretty big.
it's
And
massive. My Venus is at 0 degrees of Aries, opposing my Mars at 0 degrees of Libra. This is a massive time.
what?
And so, for any of you out there who have that as well, this is a massive time of reclamation for us. And I mean, I think that the heat is going to be on because I also do think in that way if you have Venus at that particular point, I would be curious to know in the comment section down below how much more Venusian you have found yourself moving over the last months. You know what I mean? Like, what does that look like for you? Because I think that in that way, we'll have what I would like to call as new Venus leaders. Right? You may
Mm.
be getting some Venus concepts or doing some real shedding that later down the road, you're actually helping other people come to the other side of that because it was quite unexpected for me. So I'm curious, let me know in the comment section down below if you're like 0 to 1 degree, zero right in there of Aries. Let me know how your experience is going so far. And
I
you
always I,
can,
I always look at transits currently, like I'm a huge opera fan, theater fan, so I always look at like who's on stage for the current story, and it's Stormy. You're on stage. You're on stage along with the people that you're just talking to right now. You all are on stage. Yeah, I like to see those comments. I'm
so you guys
curious.
can put on your opera goggles and watch us and be like, are they okay? Because if we're okay, y'all will be okay. Really is what it is. And Nick, you're going to keep talking about beautiful astrology. So, how can people see you, connect with you, work with you? What do you got?
Yeah, a lot of my focus is on my YouTube channel, Sparkles of Gold Astrology. I'm doing weekly forecasts and random live streams. I do live chart readings, do phone calls on there sometimes. I have other plans, some interesting, fun things. Some of the things they have to do with some of the things that we talked about today, transit wise. Um, I'm at my best doing one-on-one consultations. I love doing them. I'm feel very centered and focused more than ever. So there's that. And I'm also privately with certain students doing one-on-one mentoring that's going on. And I will be um, at the NORWAC conference, outside of Seattle, Memorial Day weekend, right? I'll be there helping out with the conference online and in person. And yeah, I'll be there too. And I'm also involved behind the scenes with other things astrologically with some other organizations and always have my hand in some sort of story. So, but yeah, that's me. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. You guys, I will make sure that links and connections to Mr. Polemanakis are in the description box down below. And just because it is Venus retrograde and we've got a lot of the story going on, I want to know, first of all, if you're feeling this already, is this Venus retrograde already kind of stirring some things for you, whether it is around that money, the self-love, any of those things? Because first of all, you're not alone, right? Like we've just talked about this, the whole world is going to be going through this. But I also think that it is a beautiful time to rest, realign, reclaim, kind of get back to what you forgot about your Venus. And because of that, I am going to put the the Venus Reset program on sale for you. So it's a special offer that's going to go and extend through April 12th. It'll take us through the bulk of the retrograde and the direct process. So if you've been struggling with that, come hang out. 22 beautiful days. You get to do it on your own at your own pace, guided exercises, some journaling. It's very, very, very Venusian. And trust me, at the end, you come out more realigned, right? So far at this particular point, there are 250 students who have been through it, which I'm really, really grateful for. So this is a great time to realign with that Venus energy. So if that's something you're looking for, go ahead and click in the description box down below. Get into click in the description box for everything. I feel like the description box is like the pre, during, and the after party of every YouTube video, right?
Yeah, no, yeah. I sneak in little things in there too in the copy. I sometimes because I like there's certain people that read the description boxes, the links, but sometimes I'll throw in, I won't say anything. I'll put a link to a song in there. Sometimes yes, I'm all about that, Stormy.
Yes. All right, you guys. So if you are ready to go a little bit deeper, take the next layer of this Venus story, then you can click into either one of these videos. It'll pop up at the end, and I look forward to seeing you there. And I look forward to sharing your journey with you. So share with me, because during the Venus reset time that we've got going on as well, I've had a recommitment to following you guys through the comment section and seeing what you say and engaging with you down there. So I love you all a ton. Thank you, Nicholas, for coming again.
Thanks,
And
Stormy. Thank
we'll
you.
we'll see you guys in the Venus retrograde. I know. Bye, guys.